This is a report from the Immigrant and Refugee Task Force that was formed a year ago, July, to examine a number of issues. I think it's important to note from the very beginning how prominent and involved the immigrant and refugee community within King County is. A quarter of the population in the county speaks a language other than English at home, and over 20% of the county's residents are foreign-born. So I think the work of the task force over the last year has been very valuable. I've been briefed on some of the report already, and I look forward to the formal presentation this afternoon. Mr. Reed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very briefly, I'll introduce this topic, and then I will introduce the panel. So as you've indicated, Mr. Chair, this is the Immigrant and Refugee Task Force report that you called for about a year ago. The issue came to the Council's attention as you've heard reports over the course of years about the increasing numbers of immigrants and refugees who are present in King County. So in 1990, I think the numbers were about 9.3% of the county's population were foreign-born. As of 2008, that number had increased to about 19.4%, coming from Asian nations as well as Latin America, from Africa and Eastern Europe, and elsewhere in the world. And as you did indicate, about a quarter of the county's population currently speaks a language other than English at home. This is also in the context of the county's ongoing equity and social justice mission, and the council has noted that for immigrants and refugees, accessing county services can be a challenging effort, recognizing that the need to understand service offerings and agency programs may be difficult, as well as understanding laws and requirements, as well as the structure of government may be a challenge for immigrants and refugees. So in this context, the council worked with the executive to develop a structure to provide a response to these concerns. The structure that was proposed or that was discussed was a commission. However, it was recognized that there would be challenges in putting together a commission having to do with the membership and having to do with the role, mission, and the appointment process. And so in July of 2015, under the guidance of Council Members Gossett, Dembowski, Haig, and McDermott, you approved Ordinance 18085, which created a task force to address the questions that I've just described. The task force began meeting late last year and very quickly recognized that there was a need for outreach to the broader community, to the various immigrant and refugee communities, and did put together an aggressive effort to actually meet, to do 20 outreach meetings with these communities throughout King County, heavily in the south end as well as the east side. So the panel is here today to present the report of the task force, and the members present at the table are on my far right, Alaric Bien, who's with the East Side Refugee and Immigrant Coalition, Sameth Mel, who's with the Coalition of Immigrants and Refugees and Communities of Color, and to my immediate right is Dinah Wilson with the seat of Kent, and Book de Geyser will join us in just a second. I'll also note that we do have a couple of other members of the task force present. Those include Ms. Joanna Chong, I believe. I don't know if she's still here, but
yes.
Joanna Chong, who is with the Korean Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Mengstab Tegai, who's with the Network for Integrating New Americans, and Ms. Lola Zakharova, who's with the Seattle-Tashkent Sister City Association. And the task force was facilitated by Book de Geyser, who will join us in just a second, as well as Marge McClung. I'll also note that council staff, including Carmela Ennis, Christina Logsden, and Cindy Domingo, provided support to the process. And so we have asked the three members to take a piece of the report, to take 3 to 5 minutes apiece, and outline perspectives on those pieces. So, want to go forward?
Thank you very much. So as you know, between 2000 and 2010, more than half of King County's new population was foreign-born, and it's continuing to grow. The majority of this population is located in communities outside the city of Seattle, and in Bellevue and Redmond, where we come from, me and some of us, nearly 40% are foreign-born and speak a language other than English. And that's more than twice the rate as in Seattle, which often surprises people. Many of them are really integrating quite well, but at the same time, many of our immigrants and refugees are not. There's unequal access to opportunity, language and cultural barriers, and institutional and structural racism. And even among those who succeed economically and academically, we still hear stories a lot, especially on the East Side, about obstacles to full integration, a lack of sense of belonging, and particularly among our youth, very high rates of anxiety, stress, and depression. The current services addressing immigrant and refugees throughout the county is really a patchwork of services, and there's not much coordination or communication between them. There's very little leadership at the state and federal levels, and even with our regional, sub-regional efforts, like on the East Side with the East Side Refugee and Immigrant Coalition, we still find large gaps in services, very few culturally competent programs with bilingual and bicultural staff, even though we have been making some progress recently. So what we found is really a huge need for coordination of resources at the county level, not just financial resources, but information and access. We need to institutionalize our commitment and accountability to immigrant and refugee communities, and we need to provide meaningful opportunities for engagement. We've heard over and over through our community meetings about the desire to be engaged, to feel a part of the community, and to be represented at all levels of government. And we know that when everyone in our community succeeds, we all benefit. So in our task force, a subgroup of us, and I can't remember the name of our subgroup, it was the Alignment and Power subgroup or something like that. We looked at scores, literally scores of efforts across the nation and around the world, including places like New York, San Francisco, Santa Clara County, Victoria, Australia, and The Hague. And we found some common threads in our research, and those can be found in detail on page 27 of your report. But I just wanted to kind of pull out some of the things that really stood out for me. And one was that the most effective means of serving immigrants and refugees was to have a dedicated office that was able to influence policy, oversee integration efforts, and the community outreach. Now, the commissions are good. They're a very good first step in focusing attention on the issues, but that really gets lost if it's folded into other commissions or into other offices. And what we found is that by having a standalone office with adequate resources, that's the way that these issues can really be resolved. With our patterns of settlement going mostly outside of Seattle right now, we need a county-wide mechanism to convene and coordinate efforts across our multiple jurisdictions to help all immigrants and refugees become engaged, thriving members of our community. And if King County doesn't do it, no one else can. So I want to hand it over to my colleague and friend, Samet Mel, to talk a little bit about the community engagement process.
Thank you, Alec. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. My name is Samet Mel. I'm with the Coalition of Immigrant Refugees and Communities of Color. The really amazing thing with the outreach that the task force has done this particular time is the fact that they've decentralized this outreach engagement process to the receptors of the communities. And the communities were basically conducted in 20 different community meetings, reached about 505 individuals all across King County. And there were 18 ethnicities represented, as well as 16 languages that were represented under that. There were a whole bunch of issues that were highlighted, but I want to also highlight 4 specific ones that were always coming up front. Number 1, discrimination for immigrant and refugees communities, language and culture issues, the difficulty understanding and navigating the systems, insufficient resources, and invisibility of communities. As you probably may know, we have been very much under the radar in terms of visibility. A lot of us also are hyper-marginalized. And personally, I have known 3 people that committed suicide in the last month. And mental health issue is also a huge issue in our community. So a lot of our folks suffer from PTSD, and a lot of that really comes down to, are we getting the services that we need and the resources? And there's an intersectionality that we have to keep in mind, the fact that it's not only a siloed approach or a siloed solution, but we need different intersections of solutions. And I think that the King County Refugee Task Force has really went out to the community and looked at those solutions and come up with an approach that will really help to span a solution that is county-wide, that supports our process. A bigger issue also is language. I think we all know that already, and I really want to applaud the King County elections for also making that access available to so many different communities, but there is so much work that we have to do to move forward to engage in an inclusive community. So this outreach has really reached a lot, but we want to make sure that folks are continued to be supported through the resources, and resources are allocated so that we can have a very inclusive community engagement across King County. So thank you. I'm going to pass the mic down to my colleague here, Dinah Wilson.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and council members, for the opportunity to provide recommendations to you on the formation of a commission. We think that this is very critical to really making sure that our immigrant and refugee communities have pathways forward to success in our community. And we spent lots of time looking at what would be a good way to do this. And so I'm going to go over the recommendations. I'll highlight what those recommendations are. They're in your packet, starting I think up on page 28 in the report. So I'll touch on the highlights of what we would recommend the commission would look like. We would recommend a 13-member commission with 3-year staggered terms up to 2-term limits. At least 6 of the members we recommend would be from unincorporated and suburban cities. We had a subgroup on that to look at special unique issues that affect unincorporated and suburban cities. And we really feel that if we don't give that the attention it deserves by having representatives from those communities, that we won't get the results we would like to see, to make sure that some of the resources continue to flow that way, and that we look at some of the disproportionality because of what's happened because of the housing crisis, where a lot of immigrants and refugees have moved to the suburban cities, in particular South County. We would also recommend that at least 2 of the members on the commission be from organizations that specialize in representing refugees, and then 2 be from organizations that specialize in representing immigrants. We would also recommend that 1 member be from a faith-based community. We would, in appointing the commission, and there are other recommendations, but these were the things that we really would recommend that you require. And in appointment, we would like to see open appointments. Anyone could apply to be on the commission, and we would do a lot of outreach, including tapping back into the resources that we already tapped when we had some of the community conversations, and reaching even out farther as we could to make sure that it's open to all. People can just submit an application, and then the executive, along with a committee of immigrants and refugees, community members could work with him to make those appointments. And, again, community input is very important. We want to make sure that the conversations that we had matter to us and to you. And that means continuing to tap into those resources so that people can have access to the appointments. Another thing that we recommended would be a standalone office, because we realize that what happens oftentimes is that immigrants and refugees are part of something else. They're like, okay, let's look at immigrants and refugees, but we really need some dedication to immigrants and refugees to really move the needle on some of the issues that my colleagues mentioned earlier. So we recommend a standalone office, but we understand that there are practicalities because of budget and other issues that might not be able to happen immediately. So we wanted to give you 3 options to look at. The first would be the standalone office with at least a director and 3 staff members. And that would be, for the first year, a budget of about $540,000. The second would be an office either located in the King County Council or in the executive's office with 2 staff, a strategic advisor, and a coordinator, and that would be about a $245,000 annual budget for the first year. The third option would be, again, an office in, placing the staff in the King County executive's office or within the council office, and just have 1 staff person, which would be a strategic advisor, and that would be $160,000. Another very innovative recommendation we have is creating a hub where it'd be a gathering place for really people who are looking at immigrant and refugees issues, to a way to achieve collective impact. How can we have a role where we can bring people together, where we can bring ideas together, where we can have a coordinating function, where we can do convening, where we can really be sort of a real hub for innovative ideas, to exchange ideas, to bring people together, to partner and to collaborate. We would recommend a hub for this. And we recommend that a mechanism for how this could work is to have 4 working groups. About 4 issue areas rose to the forefront when we had our conversations. The first would be housing and homelessness. As you all know, we're seeing a lot of attention about that because it's a continuing issue that really has a disproportionate impact on immigrants and refugees. The second working group would be on employment and small business. The third on barriers to accessing services, and the fourth on criminal justice and safety. The goal of these working groups is to build a shared county-wide strategy under the leadership of the commission to address each of the top issues identified by communities. Again, we don't need to go out and reinvent the wheel. We've already been told these are the issues that are critical, and we see that in a lot of us in our work lives. In conclusion, with these recommendations, we believe that we have provided a mechanism toward accomplishing the goal of achieving fair and just access to services and opportunities, resulting in successful integration of immigrant and refugees as engaged, thriving members of the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and King County Council members. My name is Boukta Qaisar, and I'm the consultant who was hired along with my business partner, Margie McClung, to help facilitate and drive this process. And I just want to emphasize a couple of points that we heard throughout this process, some of which has been already brought up by task force members. Number one is that in our research, we found a number of cities that have office or a commission addressing these issues of, bringing together the interests and needs of immigrants and refugees, but very, very few counties addressing this. And we really believe that in continuing the tradition and spirit of innovation and best practices and being a cutting-edge county, that it makes a lot of sense for us to join that effort and at the county level make a commitment to bringing all of these services together and to have a commission and staff and office that address the issues. The second is that throughout the entire process that you heard about, we had over 20 community meetings, engaged hundreds of people in giving feedback to this process. I heard over and over again that this is not about charity. This is not about giving, but it's actually about learning to receive and being a county that is welcoming and opened to people that are coming to join the fabric of our society. On the task force, of course, we had lawyers, bankers, business members, and nonprofit executives, community organizers, and we interviewed so many people who are trying to find a way to bring their voice, their skills, their expertise, and to add to the community that we are. And we really believe that this commission and office would allow for people to more fully be a part of our community. I think that this concept of the hub is also really important to pay attention to, because it's not necessarily about adding services, but it's about so many services that are existing in the top priority issues of education, criminal justice, homelessness. There are a lot of services being offered to members of immigrant and refugee communities, but they're not coordinated, they're not comprehensive. We heard this over and over again, that people are not talking to each other, and as a result, they're not really aware of who's doing what in immigrant and refugee communities. And this commission and the office can really be a place where all of these efforts come together, and the collective impact allows for much more success. And I think that it's also a really important continuation of the commitment to equity and social justice that this county has already expressed and implemented in multiple ways. And in closing, I just want to emphasize that the task force members, I was paid to drive this process, and I was honored to be a part of it, and it was wonderful. And the task force members were volunteers who have work full-time and also are members of immigrant and refugee community councils on top of their full-time pay, and also dedicated many, many hours of their time over these 10 months. So I really want to thank them for pulling these recommendations together, and thank you all for driving this entire process.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the work you've done over the last 10 months and bringing the report to us a month or so ago, and for the recommendations we have before us that we now are informed by your work to take more steps to, as you say, make King County a leader. The needs of immigrant and refugee communities are not limited to one jurisdiction within a county, to the city of Seattle or to the city of Tukwila, but actually span those boundaries. And one can live in one community and have work issues in another community. Making sure that we're serving people throughout the county without those geographic bounds, I think, is very important, particularly as we see some of the community move and not be centered in Seattle as it historically was. For further comments, discussion, Councilmember Cole-Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate this report, and I want to spend some time going over it very thoroughly. I appreciate all the work that you and the others have done. I do have a question in that we appropriately placed together immigrants and refugees in this task force and all that's being done in the recommendations that you've made. I understand there are differences between access for services between immigrants and refugees, and I'm wondering how much of those differences came out in the work that you did. I remember a meeting, this was a few years ago, and I don't remember the details, but with individuals, including from the Asian Counseling and Resource Center, a referral center, that about the particular federal constraints as well on whether individuals were here because of being having refugee status versus immigrant status. Could you mention this a little bit more, please?
Yes, I think we did see those differences. You know, immigrants choose to come, and refugees come because they've been persecuted. You know, we know, and so oftentimes there's more poverty for refugees. Not always, and we're seeing refugees now that have less poverty and are quite capable and have great job skills, and it varies from person to person. It varies if you come from a rural area versus a city area. If you come from a city area, you might have more access to education, for example. It varies based on cultural differences. For example, I know in the city of Kent, we have a lot of Somali Bantu, and they were not allowed to be educated. And so they, have more challenges with employment and things of that nature. So we do see a difference, and we did call that out in our report. And you guys might want to add additional. Sure. Yeah.
So even within the Southeast Asian community, because a lot of time when we look at data, it's not just aggregated. So Cambodian Americans, Laotians, and Hmongs are kind of stuck under the umbrella of Asian American. But if you really look at the fine details, we're lagging behind in high school graduation rates, in business ownership, in so many different sectors of society. And that's also because a lot of the Southeast Asian Americans that live here now come from the war-torn countries of Southeast Asia during the 70s. The highest refugee resettlement number in the U.S. history, up to 1.4 million. And a lot of us come through PTSD. So that's why I want to stress also the mental health resources, because when we look through the research that we've done with the Washington State as well, there was a very, very small portion of that budget that went to mental health. And a lot of these issues that my community and the Southeast Asian community actually has is related to PTSD and secondary trauma, and I have to go through that as well. And other generations, as a 1.5 generation Khmer American, having to grow up in White Center, in High Point area, and recognizing the different levels of access that I had growing up, as opposed to my other peers. And there's a lot of identity issues. So I think that this hub really can bring people together, can really centralize a resource station. It's a space where we don't have to work in silos, that we can work together and collaborate and to address these issues. There are different issues also within the particular nations, that the immigrant and refugee populations that come to Seattle. And we are addressing issues together as we're also having baggage from the past because of U.S. foreign policy and bombs that are dropped on our country. So what we're really asking for is an inclusive environment that we can actually rebuild our life and our dignity and our community. Space is important as well, because a sense of belonging, like what Alaric was talking about, is very important. And especially with what is going on with the hateful rhetoric on a national level, it's so much more important and imperative that we continue to build this inclusive community so that all communities actually can thrive in King County.
And I think your question is a really good one. I think that there are differences between immigrants and refugees that we all know and have spoken to in the report. And they all face many of the same issues, just to varying degrees. So while there may be more PTSD sufferers amongst refugees, it's not like the immigrants also don't have equitable access to mental health services. So I think that our approach has been that if we put them together and talk about the needs of all of these communities, we can address them adequately.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's very helpful. And perhaps I can speak with Mike, our staff later. But as I recall, and it might have had to do with human trafficking, but there were some actual federal restrictions on when services could be provided in terms of how long of a period people had to be here before they would be eligible for them.
We have an immigration attorney on the task force who may know more about that. I'm not familiar with the details of that. I do know, though, that when I first started this work decades ago, refugees got 5 years of assistance from the federal government, and that has quickly been cut down to the point where now it's 3 months. Is that correct?
That
Three
might
months,
have been what it was.
right?
3 months.
3 months, and you are expected to have resettled, found a job, enrolled in school, all of that, and then you're treated the same as any other immigrant.
I think that's probably what it was, but I know it was totally insufficient time that was allowed. I thought it was very alarming.
We're going to ask if a member of the task force, Lola, oh, I see, sorry. Here you are.
No,
Would like to make a comment.
that's the lawyer.
Yes.
Have the-
Go ahead, Lola, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for your question. So there is a...
Could
I
you
think you're
introduce
good-
yourself?
I apologize. My name is Lola Zakharova, and I'm a task force member. I'm also a practicing immigration attorney.
Okay.
I think your question goes to the restrictions for victims of human trafficking. There is a federal program where a visa is allocated to people who are victims of human trafficking, who were brought here by coyotes or whatnot. There are certain criteria that needs to be met for people to get the refugee status. Other restrictions include undocumented people, women and children, the crisis that is taking place right now down south at the border when refugees are fleeing violence in Central America. They're trying to cross the border and come to this country. There is a number of issues they're facing. They actually need to show the government that they are refugees in the technical sense, that they're facing persecution based on faith, nationality, religion, social opinion, and political opinion. And they're often underrepresented. They don't have an attorney. They don't have right to an attorney. So there's a lot of differences these people are facing. But I think it's also important to understand that a refugee in a technical sense, a lot of people who are coming to this country as refugees, they're coming because a federal government understands that they're refugees and creates a special program for these people to come to this country, right? So, for example, Syrians, people from Syria, or Meskhetian Turks, or some other ethnic minorities that the U.S. government spends the resources to investigate the problem and to bring these people to this country. Now, there are some people who are technically immigrants because they didn't come here on a refugee program, but they're facing the same persecution in their home country. It's just they didn't fall under the criteria. They were not recognized by the U.S. government as refugees officially, but they are refugees because they're fleeing persecution, because they believe in democracy, or because they're Jehovah's Witnesses, or they want to practice, they're suffering from domestic violence at home. So all of these people are fleeing violence and oppression, but they come here differently. But the problem is that we're trying to separate people into immigrants and refugees, and this border is not always very bright. It's really blurred, and I think it's important to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Mr. Chair, may I have one more follow-up?
Yep, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Zakharova, thank you for that very helpful explanation. And I would like to mention to you, I'm assuming you're from Tashkent? So,
I am.
From where?
in 1988, one of the highlights of my life was being a construction worker in Tashkent, in Uzbekistan then, building the Seattle-Tashkent Peace Park. And Plowshares had organized that, and there were 7 teams of individuals, each being there for 3 weeks. And I helped build that Peace Park and ate lunch every day in the Cafe Seattle,
Yes.
which was right there. It was a wonderful time.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to, we are actually organizing the reopening of the Tashkent Park here on Capitol Hill, and it's coming up. So I would be happy to share the information. So there will be a lot of people, alumni who are coming to the park to kind of reconnect, including some of the Plowshares, Fred Nolan's and other folks. Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Gossett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to first begin by saying that I concur with my colleagues in your tributes you've already given to the task force for spending some really excellent time thinking about this issue of immigrants and refugees as it relates to a large, as we heard earlier by Mike, a large number of our population who are not born in this country. And to the extent that we are able to crystallize those issues and hopefully provide some reasonable support from the county level, I think it'll be very helpful in making more progress than we would have made had we not initiated this effort and hopefully move toward something a little more substantial. But when you were speaking, you said that you highlighted 4 problems, the 4th of which was the criminal justice system. And I don't know if you or the other task force members know that we have been working on disproportionality in the juvenile justice system. In particular, we're concerned about the whole, but we've been focusing upon the juvenile. And one of the things that we've been told is that for African Americans, the quickest, the largest growth in the African American male population in juvie has been among Somali youth, but it's not disaggregated out. They're just African American when they get brought in. So I don't know how it is that we might take that into consideration and figure out how we, because I know a lot of them are suffering from trauma of all sorts and poverty and other issues. But I don't know how we can disaggregate it out where we could be more effective at reducing disproportionality as it relates particularly to East Africans. So I'm looking forward to having an opportunity to read your report. We've been on recess, so I have not had an opportunity to read it yet. But I wanted to say that, just from listening to each of you, listening to questions from my colleagues, that it has been, you guys put some time and effort, and I think that you'll find that we'll put the same kind of effort into trying to figure out what the county might be able to do to be more helpful than we've been in the past. And before I give up the chair, I want to particularly thank Mike Reed and Carmela Ennis for all the work that they did as support for you all. I know that Carmela helped you all put together a lot of community conversations, community meetings on various issues, and I know that that was helpful. So you can see from that that if we work together, we'll be able to make some progress. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me these minutes.
Yes, of course. Councilmember Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I too want to say ditto to thank you for a variety of things. The amount of work was very thorough, and it's excellent to see that in the report. I thank you for calling out that it's not just in the city, that it's in the suburbs, and it's in the unincorporated area. And unfortunately, the unincorporated area frequently gets overlooked. So I thank you for saying that because it is what happens, and it's not just me saying that. And I do represent a lot of Microsoft area, as you know, and because of Microsoft, we have many, many different nationalities around the world. And I was in the grocery store the other day, and I can't even tell you how many languages I heard. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm in the United Nations. This is really cool. So it is a changing society in the other parts of the county. And I think in the Redmond area, we get along awesome. And I can tell you that when we've had issues with cultural things, that the Indian community has reached out very, very well and told me their problems, and we've had large meetings and been able to work them out. And so it's a matter of knowing what the needs are and being clear that if you have a need, your council member is going to want to know about it. And for some of them, they didn't think they could call, or who was big enough to call. And when I told them they're all big enough to call, they're like, oh, that's cool. So, and then I gave them a magic phone number. This one gets me. It was great. And I think it's really important that that's open. And so it continues. One thing I wanted to tell you is that we have put money, $65 million a year for the next 6 years, into a human services account. And one of the things about that account that I'm very excited about is the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and that we are going to do some amazing work in this county with looking at who are the children who have had adverse childhood experiences, moving to a completely foreign country, eating new foods, seeing things you've never seen before. And I can tell you that one of the children that I have been very close to in Africa, when he came and saw me in an apartment and he saw a flushing toilet, he was so scared. He had never seen one before, and he was really afraid what was going to happen to him. So that's traumatic, and we don't really think about the little things that traumatize people. But I think you getting together and really looking at that ACEs money is going to be really important, because these are kids that would really, I think, qualify for that. Other thing I wanted to tell you is that I am very concerned that we have 178 languages in this county, and we don't have a way of dealing with that. And every time for the last 5 years, I've said, we need to do something about this. I always get a roadblock. And the roadblock is we have to have somebody certified, so we can't do anything. And that is like, I won't even say what I think about that answer. Anyway, it's not a satisfactory answer. But if we could get these groups together and say, I am X language, and we get people from that community to say, if Mr. X interprets it, we're good. And we will have a list of people from the county that the communities put together and say, if it's run through these 1, 2, 3 people, we will accept it. I think that would make a huge difference because I have worked now for over 6 years to try to get the master legal forms of this county translated into 178 languages. We've gotten several of them, but we haven't gotten them all. And the reason we have is because we haven't got the money to find 178 interpreters who are accepted. Now, I realize that people will say, well, legal translation is very difficult. But if we at least get somebody to do the draft of it, then because the state law requires 3 people to do it, the last time we did this, the people who did it did such a good job that the Supreme Court waived the 3rd one. So I know we can do a good job. And if we could do that and have the master forms so people in every language in this county had the ability to make out their own legal forms if they were literate in their own language, that would help so many people. So that is a project that I am passionate about. And if there's anybody else that would like to help me be passionate about that, I would love the help. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Kishar?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add to Councilmember Gossett's point that we actually did collaborate with the Disproportionality Task Force and did a number of the community meetings together and asked questions in our community meetings about the experiences with police, with the criminal justice system, and of course got a lot of feedback that is in the paper for you to read. And as you'll see in our paper, throughout the paper, we really refer to how the lack of data, disaggregated data, that tells us about, as you pointed out, about what communities are impacted and how are they impacted is a huge problem. And that's one of the top recommendations that you'll notice in the paper, that we need to collect data that tells us the story of what communities live in our county and what their experiences are. And if I could just add that in a former life, I used to run interpreter and translation certification program, and I know about the value of interpretation and translation that's done well, and I know that it's tremendously challenging, and a person like myself, I'm obviously fluent in 2 languages at least, but it would not be easy for me to translate documents. That's not something I know about. So it's difficult to find the money and to find the right people, but there are so many talented people in our community who I think could help you.
And can I also add in, I think this is, I love your ideas, and I think that this really speaks to the idea of having a hub where we can take ideas, innovative ideas, like, things like this is not working. Why don't we think of it differently and figure out what we can all do together? Maybe we don't need bona fide stamped, approved, certified translators, but there are other ways of doing it. And, as a employee of the City of Redmond, I can only do so much. As a member of the Eastside Refugee and Immigrant Coalition, we don't have resources, we're all volunteers, but having a centralized hub where these sorts of issues can be brought and thought about and implemented, I think is really a key piece of what we're recommending here in this report.
Councilmember Lambert?
Thank you. So I understand what you're saying is true, and I'm very good friends with the lady that set up the statewide interpreter program, Joanne Moore, and I've talked to her about that very issue. And what you said is also right. When you keep hitting your head against a wall because of legalities and nobody wants to be sued and blah, blah, blah. But even if the document is only 80% correct, at least you've got 80% of what the message is trying to be. If it's not a legal document, just like instructions for something, at least you have 80%. You're much better off than if you have 0%. So how do we get to the place where we say, okay, legal documents have to be 100%, but maybe instructions on this, we can get as close as possible. So I only speak 1 language and a half. So I went into the Bing translator and put in a bunch of sentences to see if they came out properly in Spanish. And they did. And so I'm like, okay, maybe technology is good enough that we can say, if we can put it in the Bing translator and whatever comes out is good enough. We have to get someplace where we have a starting point. So anybody who wants to help me, I'm willing to work on it. Thank you.
Councilmember Dombowski.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel for your presentation summarizing the report. You know, we here are the County Council for Martin Luther King County, and Reverend King once said, anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. And to me, that's what this work is about. It's about making sure that everybody living in the United States considers themselves an insider and not an outsider. And the process that the task force undertook to develop what appears to be, and I've just skimmed it, but I'm going to read it in its entirety, a very fine report, is impressive. It was grassroots-based. It was listening-oriented. It went into the community and asked. It was following all of the right practices and principles that we preach. And as a result, it has generated a very powerful document, right? And its recommendations, I think, should be taken very seriously and to the best of our ability implemented. I really enjoyed the dialogue here on the dais and with you about some of the ways in which I think a commission and ultimately, and I'm very strongly supportive of, an office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs could help us in this government and with our partners throughout the region in our cities be the kind of open and supportive government that we must be and are compelled to be, particularly in light of the demographic factors that are listed. We have an obligation, in my view, to do this. This is not optional work. It's not optional work. Councilmember Lambert was channeling me a little bit when she mentioned the Best Starts for Kids and the adverse childhood experiences and the work we want to do there. And I cannot think about a more adverse childhood experience than a young kid who has been run out of his or her home country from war or discrimination, lived in a refugee camp perhaps for a number of years, waiting for the opportunity to come to the United States, and then come here and get resettled in an entirely different culture. Think about the long-term, serious, adverse childhood experiences that that young person suffers, and every strike is against him or her here in King County. But we are a government that wants to be responsive to that and to be supportive of young people. And we need help, in my view, we need help from the community, the immigrant and refugee community, to help us do that in the best way, because I don't know how to do it. We've got to bring people in, and that's just one example. You know, as I sit here and read your report and hear your feedback about how this group, and hopefully an office with built-in expertise that's here every day to advise us, could help us. I agree with the recommendation in the report and the distinction it draws between our equity and social justice work and immigrant and refugee issues. They are related but different. They are related but different, it seems to me, and I'm really glad that the report calls that out, because I think it could be easy to conflate the two and just say, well, we're already kind of doing that. And we are really doing a great job, I think, on equity and social justice issues. We've built that into our culture here in the government, and it's making a difference. But this is a different area, related but different. And I just think it's very fine work. I'm really, it's a moment of personal pride for me to have joined Councilmember Gossett in drafting the motion to establish the task force that has led to this work. And the whole government's come together. Every member of the council and the county executive is extremely supportive of this work. I want to add my thanks to former Representative Velma Valoria and CERC, her organization, which engaged me in a conversation in the community a couple years ago to raise this issue and to push for it. Your consultant work has been tremendous. Really appreciate that. Carmela Ennis of the council staff, Christina Logsdon of my staff, Cindy Domingo of Councilmember Gossett's staff have been active participants, along with our Office of Equity and Social Justice, Erica and Matthias, to bring forth this work. So we are the regional government. We are Martin Luther King County. I think we should live that quote. We can bring this region together and break down those silos of government to make sure that we do the very best we can to give everybody, and in this case, our refugees and immigrants, an equal opportunity to achieve the success that this country affords. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, I want to thank you for the work you've done over the last year, the report you've given us, and the direction you've given us to be able to make King County a very welcoming place for all immigrants and refugees, frankly, everyone who finds themselves here in King County. Thank you so much.